Get off my property right now, you useless idiot. Karen's scream ripped through the quiet cul-de-sac like a storm. She waved her clipboard violently, eyes wild, teeth clenched, voice echoing across perfectly trimmed lawns. Neighbors peeked nervously from behind fences, some daring to record her on their phones. Her fury was unstoppable, every word dripping with entitlement and anger. I am the HOA president. You will follow the rules, she yelled, pointing fingers like claws. Police sirens wailed faintly in the distance, adding to the tension, but Karen didn't even notice. The street felt alive with chaos, whispers, and disbelief. Every second she raged, the absurdity of the situation grew, an HOA tyrant losing control right in front of the entire neighborhood. I'm Lucas Hayes, a 38-year-old military veteran, and I moved to Liberty Ridge, California, 8 months ago, hoping for peace. After years of deployments and constant relocations, I wanted quiet streets, neatly trimmed lawns, and the kind of calm suburban life that promised stability. I imagined weekend barbecues, morning jogs along tree-lined sidewalks, neighbors waving as they walked their dogs. Liberty Ridge looked perfect. Cul-de-sacs lined with pastel-colored houses, white fences, green lawns, and American flags fluttering gently in the breeze. For a while, it felt like I had finally found a place to breathe. Then Karen Maynson entered my life. Karen is the HOA president, a woman in her early 50s, with short, messy blonde hair, sharp eyes, and a voice that could pierce glass. She didn't just enforce rules. She thrived on chaos, humiliation, and control. The first time I met her, she stormed onto my lawn, waving her clipboard, face red with fury. Your hedges are too high. Your flag is OFF Center. You're violating community standards, she shrieked, pointing aggressively at every minor detail of my property. I tried to stay calm. Ma'am, the hedges are trim and the flag is centered properly. Perfectly centered does not mean acceptable, she bellowed. I will be checking daily, and next time you'll be fined. Her yelling echoed down the cul-de-sac, bouncing off neighboring houses. From behind fences and windows, neighbors peeked, some whispering, some filming on their phones. I realized quickly that she didn't just want compliance. She wanted an audience. Her power trip was a spectacle, a daily performance for anyone who would watch. Over the next few weeks, Karen's attacks became relentless. Every morning brought a new complaint. A new violation notice slipped under my door, often with scathing, personal remarks. Your mailbox is crooked. Your driveway is too clean. You're parking in the wrong spot. Every one more absurd than the last. Each time she yelled across lawns or stormed at my driveway, neighbors craned their necks, some whispering encouragement, some shaking their heads in disbelief. One Saturday, she appeared with measuring tape, crouching in front of my flower beds to ensure every plant was exactly the right distance from the sidewalk. I'm watching, and I will not tolerate negligence, she screeched, her voice carrying for blocks. I sipped my coffee, arms crossed, try not to laugh at the absurdity, but every twitch of her fingers, every yell, reminded me she thrived on intimidation. Her obsession wasn't just with property standards. She seemed to monitor everything. The way neighbors parked, the color of curtains, even how we walked our dogs. Liberty Ridge felt like a stage, and she was the overbearing director, orchestrating terror with every shout. I started noticing patterns. She loved to humiliate people in front of others. The more neighbors watched, the angrier she got, and the louder she screamed. Sometimes she'd call police on trivial matters, citing community disruption, only to retreat in embarrassment when officers realized she was overreacting. Other times, she harassed new homeowners relentlessly, issuing violation notices for things that didn't exist, like invisible lines on sidewalks or non-existent color codes for mailboxes. I made a mental note. This wasn't just personal. Karen's abuse of power had become a neighborhood spectacle. People were quietly watching, recording her antics, whispering behind her back. And I realized I could use that. Despite the constant stress, I tried to maintain my routines. Morning jogs, tending the garden, fixing small things around the house. Anything to stay grounded. But Karen found ways to intrude even here. You're disturbing the community, she'd scream as she saw me stretching on the lawn. Excessive noise. By the end of the month, her yelling had become a part of daily life. Some neighbors began subtly showing support, nodding at me, offering quiet smiles, shaking their heads at Karen's antics. It was a small comfort, but it reminded me that power isn't just about yelling. Influence can be fragile, especially when the audience sees through the act. Still, every morning I stepped onto my porch, scanning the cul-de-sac, my heart pounding slightly, expecting her next attack. Every time she stormed by, clipboard in hand, I reminded myself, I'm a veteran. I've faced real threats. This is absurd, but it's also a challenge I can meet strategically. Karen had underestimated me, and she didn't yet realize that her obsession with control was only making her weaker. Liberty Ridge was about to see that some of us don't flinch in the face of tyranny, especially when we know our rights, our community, and our own strength. And so, the battle for peace in Liberty Ridge quietly began. The morning after Karen's first yelling tirade, I woke to find another violation notice slipped under my door. My coffee trembled in my hand as I read the absurd accusation. Your garden gnome is not aligned with the street grid. Adjust immediately or face fines. I stared at it for a long moment, trying not to laugh. Liberty Ridge had officially lost its mind. Karen wasn't just petty, she was obsessive. Every interaction was an event, and she thrived when others watched. By mid-morning, she appeared again, marching down the street, clipboard clutched like a weapon. You think you can ignore the rules? She screamed at me across the cul-de-sac, stomping her heel onto the sidewalk for emphasis. Her short, messy blonde hair stuck to her sweaty forehead, and her sharp business suit accentuated the ferocity in her posture. I stepped onto my porch, arms crossed, trying to exude calm. Karen, I followed the guidelines you sent. Can we discuss this like adults? She let out a high-pitched, incredulous scream, making heads turn in neighboring homes. Adults? Do you think I am ignoring my duties? I am the HOA president. This is my community. I noticed subtle glances from neighbors, some filming on their phones, others whispering behind fences. The tension grew like electricity in the air. Every time Karen yelled, the neighborhood reacted. Some hid nervously, some whispered encouragement to me, and others took delight in recording her over-the-top displays of authority. By noon, Karen's obsession had extended to trivial details. She measured the distance between my mailbox and driveway with a tape measure, frowning violently. You're 5 inches off. This is unacceptable, she shrieked. She jabbed a finger at the mailbox, and her shouting echoed down the cul-de-sac. I watched, sipping coffee, reminded myself that I was a veteran. This was nothing compared to real danger, but the absurdity of it was almost cinematic. As the day progressed, Karen intensified her harassment. She knocked on neighbors' doors, asking if they had seen rule violations on my property. Some complied nervously, while others rolled their eyes. By late afternoon, a small crowd had gathered on lawns and driveways, drawn by the spectacle. The air was thick with tension, whispers, camera phones raised, capturing every irrational outburst. Her tactics became more manipulative. If you don't comply, I will have you fined daily. I will escalate this to legal action. Everyone will see your non-compliance, she barked. Her words dripped with venom, but the crowd's attention, instead of intimidating me, seemed to weaken her. People could see the absurdity, the obsession, and the cruelty. Neighbors began murmuring among themselves. Does she really have to be this dramatic? One whispered, filming discreetly. Another laughed quietly, shaking her head. Karen's power, once intimidating, now seemed comical when juxtaposed with her purple-stained tirades from previous weeks, her frantic gestures, and the sheer volume of her screaming. I realized that in America, in Liberty Ridge, this wasn't just about me. It was about showing the neighborhood that she could be challenged. Every outrageous demand she made, every yell, was being witnessed and documented. Her abuse of power, once hidden behind authority, was now exposed under the bright California sun. By evening, after multiple phone calls and more absurd complaints, she retreated to her property, muttering threats under her breath. I finally took a deep breath, letting the tension drain. Liberty Ridge was calm again, for now, but I knew this was just the beginning. Karen's obsession would flare up again, and when it did, it would be more intense. I walked around my property, checking the boundaries, ensuring every gnome, mailbox, and hedge was within compliance. The absurdity was exhausting, but necessary. I couldn't give Karen the satisfaction of a legitimate complaint. She had underestimated me, and the neighborhood was beginning to see through her theatrics. As the sun set, the cul-de-sac fell into an uneasy quiet. Neighbors peeked from curtains, some nodding at me subtly, others still filming snippets on their phones. Karen's shadowy presence lingered, her screams from earlier in the day echoing faintly. Liberty Ridge was alive with whispers of rebellion, laughter, and incredulity. I knew the real challenge hadn't even begun. Karen was clever, manipulative, and relentless. But in America, here in my neighborhood, I had strategy, patience, and the support of those who could see the truth. And for the first time, I realized that sometimes exposing the absurdity of tyranny was more powerful than confrontation. By the third week of Karen's relentless attacks, Liberty Ridge had turned into a stage for her daily performances. Every morning, she patrolled the streets with her clipboard, barking orders, scrutinizing every minor detail as if the neighborhood depended on her approval. Your driveway is slightly sloped. This is America. You will correct it immediately, she screamed one morning, stomping her heel hard enough to rattle my front gate. I watched from the porch, coffee in hand, shaking my head in disbelief. Her obsession had become almost ritualistic. She measured, poked, and pointed at everything from the tilt of my mailbox to the angle of my lawn chairs. Each yell was punctuated by long pauses, allowing neighbors to witness and, inevitably, record her absurd theatrics. The neighborhood's reaction had evolved, too. Some residents now hid behind curtains, fearful of her scrutiny. Others watched from driveways, phones raised, capturing each outburst. "Does she really have to be this dramatic?" whispered a woman as Karen yelled about my supposedly crooked flower bed. A teenager laughed quietly, filming the chaos on their phone, and I realized Karen's obsession with power was slowly turning into public comedy. But Karen wasn't just about petty rules anymore. She escalated, digging for personal control. One afternoon, she accused me of creating disturbances with excessive lawn maintenance noise, claiming I violated HOA noise ordinances. "The community deserves peace." "You are the problem," she yelled, voice shrill, pointing at me like a weapon. I kept calm, reminding myself that she thrived on attention, and giving her any reaction would only strengthen her performance. Her aggression spread like wildfire. Karen visited neighboring houses, asking if anyone else had noticed my infractions. Some neighbors nervously nodded along, while others quietly shook their heads, filming her overzealous antics. Each report she collected fueled her next tirade, escalating her rage to new levels. One morning, she stomped directly onto my lawn, clipboard in hand, shouting, "The hedge height is unacceptable. America expects standards. This is not optional." She gestured violently at the greenery, hands trembling with fury. I stepped onto my porch, arms crossed, voice calm. "Karen, the hedge is perfectly trimmed." I followed every guideline. Her eyes narrowed into slits, lips pursed. "Perfectly trimmed does not mean acceptable," she bellowed. Her yelling echoed off the cul-de-sac houses, bouncing back to neighbors, who had begun murmuring, filming, and whispering quietly. The crowd's presence seemed to feed her obsession, yet simultaneously expose her fragility. Karen's tactics had grown more manipulative. She began issuing daily warnings, small, hand-delivered notes accusing me of fabricated violations. "Your flag is off by 1 degree. Your porch swing is not aligned to community standards." Each note dripping with authority, each yell adding theatrical drama. Liberty Ridge had become her stage, and she was the star of an absurd horror comedy for the neighborhood. Despite the chaos, I kept meticulous records. Each violation, each yell, each absurd order was logged. If this escalated illegal action, I would be prepared. My military training taught me patience, strategy, and the power of documentation. Karen's abuse of power, when properly recorded, could be turned against her. One late afternoon, she stormed past my porch, waving her clipboard at neighbors. "If you do not comply, I will escalate this to the authorities. Everyone will see." Her voice cracked under the strain of her theatrics. I stood silently, arms crossed, knowing the audience she craved was silently judging her performance. By evening, Karen retreated, muttering threats and scribbling notes for her next round of chaos. The neighborhood, once fearful, now whispered, laughed, and shared videos of her antics. Her power trip had started to backfire. Public exposure, it seemed, was stronger than her yelling. I walked my lawn, checking hedges, mailboxes, and flags. Each adjustment was both a compliance and a statement. I would not be intimidated, but I would document everything to ensure that her overreach could not harm me. Liberty Ridge had changed, but not in the way Karen imagined. While she sought fear, she was creating awareness, observation, and quiet resistance among the residents. And in that calm, watching the last streaks of sunset over the cul-de-sac, I realized the real battle had begun. Karen's tyranny was public now, her obsession exposed, and every yell, every irrational demand, was another opportunity to reveal her absurd abuse of power to everyone in Liberty Ridge. By now, Karen Maynson's obsession had reached a new level of intensity. Every morning, I would step onto my porch expecting her next performance. And every morning, she did not disappoint. One bright, cloudless day, She stormed down the cul-de-sac with a fury that could rival a hurricane. "Your driveway is still uneven. This is America, and you will comply immediately," she screamed, stomping hard enough to make the ground beneath her shake. Her clipboard was raised like a sword, pointing at me, every finger a dagger of authority. Neighbors emerged from behind curtains, peeking from porches, and even creeping from alleys, drawn to the spectacle as if they couldn't look away. Phones were raised everywhere, capturing the absurdity. Karen thrived on being watched, on public display, and she didn't care who saw her theatrics. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, arms crossed, trying to maintain calm. Military training has a way of conditioning patience, focus, and strategy, even when facing chaos. But Karen wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She was escalating in unpredictable ways, turning mundane details into battles. "You are parking too close to the curb. The lines are off. America demands order," she shrieked, spinning toward my neighbor's driveway and gesturing wildly at the space between my car and the street. Her voice carried like a whip across the cul-de-sac, bouncing off neighboring houses. The crowd of onlookers grew. Some whispered, some laughed quietly, others filmed the spectacle. Her obsession with public humiliation was becoming painfully obvious. Every exaggerated gesture, every shrill yell, was a performance designed to intimidate me and impress, or terrify, the neighborhood. Then came the turning point. Karen began enforcing absurd community aesthetics on the street itself. "That sidewalk is too cracked. That flower is in the wrong color scheme. Your mailbox is inferior to the others." She barked at passing cars, waving her arms as if trying to physically straighten the world. The sheer ridiculousness of it caused a ripple of snickers from neighbors, barely hidden behind hedges and fences. It was at this moment that I realized something important. The more she yelled, the more the neighborhood saw her true nature. Her abuse of power, once hidden behind the facade of rules and authority, was now plainly visible. People whispered, filming her antics, some calling friends to witness the chaos. Karen wasn't just targeting me anymore. She went door to door, questioning neighbors about my compliance, asking whether my hedges were the right height or if my garden decor matched community standards. Some complied nervously, fearing her wrath. Others subtly laughed behind her back, recording her every move. Liberty Ridge had become a theater of absurdity, and Karen was both tyrant and clown. One afternoon, she escalated a verbal intimidation aimed at public spectacle. "If you do not comply, I will escalate this to legal action. The authorities will know," she screamed, gesturing dramatically toward my porch. I stood silently, arms crossed, letting her theatrics play out. The crowd reacted, whispers, muffled laughter, and a few bold teens filming on phones, capturing every exaggerated movement. Her obsession extended beyond rules. She wanted domination. Every gesture, every yell, every absurd threat was calculated to intimidate, humiliate, and assert control. Yet in her obsession, she created her own downfall. The more extreme her behavior, the more public it became, and the neighborhood began seeing the truth. Karen Maynson was an authority. She was chaos with a badge. By sunset, she finally retreated to her property, scribbling notes, muttering under her breath. The cul-de-sac, once quiet, hummed with whispers, laughter, and recording devices. People were starting to share clips, commenting on the absurdity, spreading awareness of her extreme antics. Liberty Ridge was alive with new energy, the quiet rebellion of observation, exposure, and subtle resistance. I walked my lawn again, adjusting a flag slightly, making sure the garden was aligned. Each careful movement was a silent statement. I would comply where necessary, document everything, and never give her legitimate fuel to escalate. Karen had underestimated me. Liberty Ridge was about to learn that sometimes the observer holds more power than the tyrant, especially when the audience sees everything unfold in vivid color. And so, the escalation continued. Karen had the loudest voice, the largest stage, and the most energy, but I had patience, strategy, and the support of an awakening neighborhood. The battle for Liberty Ridge's sanity had only just begun. By the 5th week, Karen Maynson's obsession had spiraled into full-blown tyranny. Liberty Ridge wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It had become her stage, and she performed daily with alarming intensity. That morning, she stormed my driveway, clipboard in hand, eyes wide and fiery. "Your garage door is slightly squeaky. This is America. You will repair it immediately," she shouted, her voice ricocheting down the cul-de-sac. Neighbors peeked from behind fences, curtains, and porches. Phones rose to capture her frenzied gestures and shouting. Some whispered, "She's insane," while others shook their heads in disbelief. Her obsession wasn't just with the rules anymore. It was personal. Every minor imperfection became a weapon. Every complaint a performance piece. I stepped onto my porch, arms crossed, calm as ever. Karen, the garage door is functional. The slight squeak is in violation, I said, my voice steady. Her face contorted with rage. Functional does not mean acceptable. America expects standards, and you will obey. Her hands clawed the air, each movement exaggerated, theatrical, designed to terrify and humiliate. The neighborhood crowd grew. Some laughed quietly, trying to hide it. Others filmed diligently, capturing her escalating obsession. Children peeked from behind bushes, curious, some giggling nervously. Karen noticed the cameras. Her fury intensified. This is not entertainment. You will not laugh. You will comply. Her tactics evolved. She began questioning neighbors directly, asking if they had seen me disrespecting community aesthetics. Some complied out of fear, while others subtly rolled their eyes, filming her overreach. The more she tried to control, the more the absurdity became visible. One neighbor called me quietly later. "Lucas, everyone's seeing what she's doing. It's insane, but also kind of funny how over the top she is." I nodded, understanding that public exposure was slowly weakening her grip. That afternoon, she escalated to threats of legal action. "If you do not follow my instructions, I will escalate this to authorities. Everyone will know about your non-compliance," she yelled, pointing dramatically toward my porch. I remained silent, arms crossed, documenting every word mentally. Her obsession with public humiliation was her greatest weakness. Then came a particularly absurd incident. Karen noticed my garden gnomes weren't perfectly aligned. "The gnomes are not in perfect symmetry. This is unacceptable," she shrieked, gesturing wildly as if trying to physically straighten them herself. A few neighbors couldn't contain their amusement, whispering and filming the scene. Karen's power, once intimidating, was crumbling under public scrutiny. I realized something crucial. Patience was my ally. I didn't need to argue or escalate. I simply maintained order, followed guidelines, and let her antics play out in public. Each irrational demand, each theatrical yell, each absurd threat was being recorded, shared, and witnessed. The audience, unwilling or unable to intervene, was beginning to see the true face of Karen Maynson. Tyranny disguised as community leadership. By evening, she retreated to her property, muttering threats under her breath. The cul-de-sac hummed with whispered conversations, quiet laughter, and subtle amusement. Neighbors compared videos, exchanged glances, and quietly rallied against the spectacle. Liberty Ridge had shifted. The narrative of fear was slowly being replaced by observation, documentation, and awareness. I walked around my property, adjusting flags, trimming hedges, aligning gnomes. Every movement was a silent statement. I was prepared, I was strategic, and I would not give Karen the satisfaction of a legitimate complaint. In America, in Liberty Ridge, exposure was as powerful as confrontation. Karen had underestimated me, and the neighborhood had begun to notice. As the sun dipped below the tree-lined cul-de-sac, I realized the battle was far from over. Karen's voice may have been loud, her gestures dramatic, but her obsession with power was now public, fragile, and laughable. Liberty Ridge had become a stage, and while Karen performed, the audience had begun to understand the absurdity, the comedy, and the tyranny behind her yelling. The following week, Karen Maynson had clearly decided that subtlety was no longer her style. Liberty Ridge became her battlefield. That morning, she appeared on my driveway with ferocity that could only be described as theatrical. "Your flag is not exactly aligned with the street grid. This is America, and you will correct it immediately," she bellowed, clipboard swinging like a weapon, eyes wide, voice sharp enough to cut through glass. I stepped onto my porch, arms crossed, taking a slow sip of coffee. Military discipline had taught me patience, focus, and the power of observation. Karen was loud, aggressive, and public, but predictable. Every gesture, every yell, every ridiculous threat was a performance designed to intimidate me and impress, or terrify, the neighborhood. This time, however, she escalated further. After pacing my lawn and gesturing violently at hedges, flags, and gnomes, she began shouting accusations about illegal landscaping. "Your shrubs are too tall. This is America. You are a threat to community order," she shrieked, stomping her heel with each word. Her fury resonated across the cul-de-sac, bouncing off the American-style houses, neatly trimmed lawns, and white picket fences. Neighbors had gathered again, drawn by the spectacle. Some whispered, some filmed, some laughed quietly at the absurdity. Karen, fueled by the attention, continued her performance. "If you do not comply, I will escalate this to the authorities. Everyone will see your noncompliance, she yelled, pointing dramatically toward my porch. Despite her theatrics, I stayed calm, arms crossed, silent, documenting each absurd accusation. Her obsession with public humiliation was her ultimate weakness. Every irrational demand, every exaggerated gesture, every shrill yell was being recorded, shared, and witnessed by everyone in Liberty Ridge. Then came a new tactic. Karen began threatening legal action directly, claiming that I was disturbing the neighborhood's peace and safety. The authorities will arrest you. You are not fit for this community, she screamed, gesturing toward the houses and the neighbors. Some of the onlookers gasped. Others whispered, "Is she serious?" and quietly filmed every moment. Her obsession with control escalated further when she accused me of creating noise disturbances from my lawnmower and garden equipment. She paced back and forth on my property, gesturing violently, her clipboard flailing. "If you think you can ignore me, think again. This is America. I enforce order." I realized the key was to remain calm, patient, and strategic. Karen's obsession made her reckless. She wanted power, authority, and attention, but the public nature of her tyranny was turning her into a spectacle. Every angry shout, every exaggerated hand gesture, every absurd accusation was exposing her true nature to the neighborhood. By mid-afternoon, she attempted one final escalation. Approaching neighbors directly to gather eyewitness reports of my supposed infractions. Some complied reluctantly, afraid of her wrath, while others subtly rolled their eyes, filming her every move. Her power, once intimidating, was crumbling under public scrutiny. By evening, Karen finally retreated to her property, muttering threats under her breath, scribbling notes for her next round of chaos. The cul-de-sac was alive with whispered conversations, quiet laughter, and the subtle joy of observation. People compared notes, shared videos, and began to see Karen Maynson for what she truly was, a tyrant obsessed with trivial rules, publicly unraveling in her own absurdity. I walked my driveway and lawn one last time for the day, adjusting flags, aligning gnomes, trimming hedges, each movement a silent assertion of order. In Liberty Ridge, in America, exposure was more powerful than confrontation. Karen had underestimated me, and the neighborhood had begun to notice. While she continued to yell, gesticulate, and threaten, her influence had waned. As the sun set, the cul-de-sac settled into a tense quiet. Karen's tyranny was loud, absurd, and public, but the neighborhood was awakening. Every yell, every irrational threat, every over-the-top performance was being recorded and witnessed, and slowly, subtly, power was beginning to shift. By the 7th week, Karen Maynson had crossed the line from petty tyranny to full-blown obsession. Liberty Ridge had become her stage, and the neighborhood was both her audience and her jury. That afternoon, she stormed onto my driveway like a hurricane, clipboard in hand, voice shrill enough to make windows rattle. "You have violated community standards again. This is America. You will be held accountable," she screamed, pointing aggressively at me like a weapon. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, refusing to flinch. Military discipline had taught me how to handle chaos, and Karen's theatrics, no matter how loud, were predictable. Every yell, every exaggerated gesture was designed to intimidate, but the public nature of her antics had begun to turn the tables. Neighbors had gathered in numbers I hadn't seen before. Phones were raised, capturing her every over-the-top motion and shout. Some whispered among themselves, exchanging incredulous glances. Others couldn't hide their amusement, sharing videos instantly across social media. Karen's obsession with public humiliation was becoming her undoing. In a final attempt to assert dominance, she advanced closer to my porch, gesturing violently, voice cracking from exertion. "If you think you can defy me, think again. I will escalate this to the authorities. Everyone will know your noncompliance." I finally stepped forward, my voice calm but firm. "Karen, you have made your point clear. Liberty Ridge is my home, and I have followed every rule. I will not be intimidated by theatrics. This is America, and here rules apply to everyone, including HOA presidents." Her eyes narrowed. Fury turned confusion as the audience around us began to murmur. Neighbors whispered, filming, and exchanging glances that silently supported my calm stance. Karen's theatrics, once frightening, now seemed absurd. Every yell, every clawed hand gesture, every absurd accusation had been witnessed, documented, and shared. Public exposure had shifted the power balance. Karen's meltdown reached its peak when she tried one last escalation. Physically approaching the edge of my lawn, clipboard in hand, shouting incomprehensible threats about fines, legal action, and neighborhood disgrace. But her voice was drowned by the murmurs of the crowd, the subtle laughter, and the countless phones recording every irrational move. Her obsession with power had become her vulnerability. At that moment, officers arrived after a concerned neighbor called. Witnessing her erratic behavior, Karen's fury spiked. "You cannot arrest me. I am the HOA president. This is America," she yelled, waving her arms frantically. The officers calmly intervened, separating her from the crowd, noting her aggressive behavior, and warning her of potential legal consequences if she continued. I remained on my porch, arms crossed, observing quietly. My meticulous documentation, my calm composure, and the neighborhood's recordings had created a buffer against her tyranny. Karen's power trip had failed. Not through confrontation alone, but through patience, observation, and exposure. By sunset, Karen retreated to her property, scribbling notes furiously, muttering threats under her breath. The neighborhood, once fearful, now exchanged relieved smiles, whispered congratulations, and shared footage of her meltdown across social media. Liberty Ridge had reclaimed its quiet dignity, and Karen's reign of terror had been publicly exposed. As I walked around my property, adjusting flags, trimming hedges, and aligning garden decor, I realized in America, the strength of community, patience, and strategic calm could outweigh even the loudest tyrant. Karen's obsession with control had made her public spectacle, and in that exposure, her power was broken. Liberty Ridge settled into an uneasy calm. The neighborhood had witnessed the absurdity, documented the tyranny, and quietly reclaimed their sense of order. Karen's theatrics would no longer intimidate anyone. Her meltdown had become the ultimate lesson in the limits of power when it is abused and publicly observed. And as the sun dipped behind the cul-de-sac, I knew one thing with certainty. The battle was won, not with anger, but with patience, strategy, and the undeniable force of truth. Liberty Ridge finally returned to a calmer rhythm, the chaos caused by Karen's obsession now behind us. Watching her meltdown, I realized patience, strategy, and staying calm under pressure were far more powerful than yelling or intimidation. The neighborhood had witnessed the absurdity, recorded the tyranny, and quietly reclaimed their sense of order. If you enjoyed this story of suburban drama, persistence, and standing up to abuse, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more intense HOA conflicts and real-life battles in America.